Well, good evening, everybody. Welcome to the Mountaineer Locker Room Then and Now. I'm Greg Chris, joined by Frank Fear. Frank, another, well, a little bit more calm week, I guess. I was going to say another wild week in Mountaineer sports, but this was a little bit more calm, I think, this past week and what we've seen over the past few weeks. And I think that's a good thing. I don't know about you, but I think that's a good thing.
No, I'm with you all the way. It's been, we've talked about this, and you've talked with people. I have. This is the most unusual off season, so to speak, that I can remember in all the years I've been affiliated with college sports. And not that it's bad, it's just different. And so, take the football team. We're all anticipating, who's going to be on the field, how they're going to do, with not a lot of certainty in terms of who's going to be starting, who's going to be in the two deep, who's not going to be playing, and it's sort of the pause that refreshes. And the same thing with basketball.
Yeah, and I know we try to watch the press conferences and Coach Rodriguez and try to get some insight into into what's going on, but the answers are so vague, and I don't think that I don't think he's trying to cover anything up. I just think he probably don't know yet either. I mean, he has a better idea obviously than we do, but he's not giving anything away and not really talking about depth charts and players who impressed and that sort of thing. He mentions usually several players at every position when he's asked. He doesn't really give a good insight into how that depth chart is shaping up. But again, I think, I don't think that's necessarily by design. I think that's just the state of the affairs right now. Like you said, it's not a bad thing. It's just a different thing. And, I'd be hard pressed if and I don't watch other university coaches and their press conferences very often, but I'd be hard pressed to find one I think that would come out right now and say, here's our 2 depth chart, or here's our 3 deep, or here's our roster, and the way it's going to shake out. I'd say a lot of them are in the same boat that right now, they're just not totally sure. And I think they're still searching and not necessarily searching for players, but searching for answers at positions and trying to fill in the roster and get a depth chart put together. And I think it's just a work in progress, and that work may go clear up into the fall. I don't think I don't think it's anything by design to keep it as a big secret. I just think it's the nature of the beast right now. You got so many people that you're trying to evaluate and positions you're trying to fill. And, frankly, the portal players are still out there being signed. And I just think that that's just the way it is right now.
Oh, you're absolutely correct. And that's what makes it interesting in some ways, but also as we're looking for more definitive information, more certainty, we really don't have it. And, I look at it from the point of view of rather saying, I have to have that. If you take a few steps back and consider the circumstances, which are extraordinary, both in football and basketball, then you say to yourself, well, what else would you really expect here? You've got Coach Rodriguez that basically clearly has a system, and he's putting together a completely new roster. And with the coaching change, you would expect a lot of players to leave, and they did, and a lot of new players to come in. It's been exacerbated, so to speak, because of the situation with the portal and the migration of players, and the same thing in basketball. And so, and the other thing that, I shouldn't laugh because it's not. It's sort of, you just shake your head with the baseball team. So, we look for the baseball team to sort of fill in that gap and give us something to root for, and they can't be beaten, and now they're having trouble winning. And yet it's just it's a difficult time, challenging time, I think, for Mountaineer fans to get the kind of footing that we prefer to have, to be able to be more certain about, we're going into a game tomorrow, at the Big 12 championship against Cincinnati, because they beat Texas Tech this afternoon. We swept Cincinnati, not too long ago, and it was pretty convincing. And now we're not quite sure what to expect.
Yeah, you hate to see us as what we feared, and you and I talked on the phone the other day, and I felt like after the first night on Thursday when we found out that Arizona State had lost, and that's all we needed to do to clinch the Big 12 title, I felt like that we would relax and win a few games. But the opposite happened because it seemed like Thursday night seemed like they were really pressing and they're feeling the pressure a little bit. And I thought, well, that pressure's gone now. They can relax and play. And I really thought that they would roll on in those next couple of games, but instead they got hammered those next couple of games. And you just think, man, is this another funk we're getting into, or is is it just an anomaly, or what's going on here? And really disheartening because we saw the same thing last year in our collapse at the end of the year, and you hope beyond hope that that's not going to happen again this year. But it's pretty worrisome, and I think going into that game tomorrow, it's really crucial. If they can win that game, I think then we're going to be okay. But it's that pressure seem like they put on themselves to to win, and they just got to relax and play like they were playing earlier in the year. They didn't look like the same team. Again, you and I talked. They didn't look like the same team. The hitting was just not there. Pitchers struggled, and that kind of started back a couple of weeks ago when we lost several games late in the games when our pitching failed us. Now it seems like the bats have gone south as well, so it's kind of worrisome. And gives us you hope that they can win tomorrow and give us some hope and keep us going, because if they would lose, it would be a real disappointment, I think, just because a couple of weeks ago we were talking about hosting a regional, and that looks like it's wishful thinking at this point, unless they would happen to win the Big 12 tournament.
Yeah, and what we had been doing doesn't seem to make as much sense now. And that is, we would go over where, look at the Big 12 batting, what are they doing in terms of batting? How do they compare it? Fielding and pitching and so on. But, at this point, that's probably a lesser issue than a team that's trying to find its footing and taking a deep breath and saying, look, we at one point through most of the season, we were at the top of the national chart in terms of wins and winning percentage, and all of a sudden we're not winning games that we won before. But let me follow up with one thing, and then ask you a question that will ask you about your coaching experience as it relates to what we're experiencing in baseball. But you have, and I'm sure our viewers, at least some, have been following the news, and unless WVU wins at least 2 games this week and probably needs to win the Big 12 championship, we won't get a host. We won't get a hosting situation. Right now, what I read this morning is that we're certain to make the NCAAs, no question about that. And they're saying that TCU and also KU look to be locks. But again, we know how that can change with the basketball situation. But because K-State is there, Arizona State is there too. So it really comes down to who's going to win the Big 12 tournament. But right now they have a slotted, if things stay the way they are now, in the Florida State Regional, opening up against Mississippi State, which is going to be a tough opening game from the SEC. And the other 2 teams, obviously, Florida State's, since they're hosting it, they're in the regional, and Bethune-Cookman. If we had just last week, they were projecting us in the Morgantown regional, and we would open up against Wright State. So the host gets the lowest ranked number 4 of that regional. So we're just going to have to see. Again, clearly one game's not going to do it to be a host. 2 might, but what I've read, Greg, and you may have seen something different. They need to win all 3. But the question I have for you is, I'm sure somewhere in your coaching career, a winning team started to lose some consecutive games. And if that happened in your career, what did you do as a coach to try to turn that around? And was it successful?
Well, one of the things that I always try to do as a coach is, and I stress this, you forget about that last game and start thinking about the next one or the last shot or the last pitch or whatever, and start thinking about the next one. And um, you know, psychologically, it's one of those things where, as a coach, you didn't really want to talk about it. You didn't want to say to the guys, "Hey, listen, we've lost three in a row. If we don't win, if we don't start winning, this is going to happen, et cetera, et cetera." So psychologically, you try not to emphasize those things and say too much about them. I guess it's like the old, jinxing the kicker. You don't talk to the kicker before he goes out and kicks the game-winning field goal, or you might jinx him, so you don't say anything about it. I think my approach was to not even discuss it. Just you move on to practice, you prepare for your next game, and hope it works out. But that doesn't necessarily keep the players from thinking about it. And I know in West Virginia's case right now, those players it has to be on their mind that man, we're slumping. We're in a slump. What do we do here? And that they might need to call up Lou Pelliccioni and talk to him a little bit, a little bit, get straightened out. But yeah, I think that, as a coach, you try to, put your focus on something more positive as opposed to the negative, which is the losing and not competing. So I'm sure that's what they're doing. They're looking ahead and not behind. And that's what you got to do. Even when you're winning, you have to do that. I mean, you can't, that, and I'm not saying this in a braggadocious type of way, but we had a lot of success when I was coaching the basketball teams, and one of the hard things was to get them, to not pay attention to, their record or how much they won the last game by, or how good they were, where they were ranked, et cetera, and get them concentrating on, the next game that's coming up. And there were several games when, we were the prohibitive favorite and would go in and really struggle. And simply because we knew we were better than the other team. And, I think back to a particular incident, and what got me thinking about it. I thought about it all day today. In fact, it's ironic that we're talking about it right now, but I have a good friend who I coached against by the name of Chuck Elkins. Chuck was the coached 35 years at Buffalo High School down in Putnam County. Done a great job down there, and I coached against each other quite a bit. We were in a tournament together every year called the West Virginia Hometown Invitational Tournament, which was a public school, small school tournament we had every year. And they also have one in Beckley called the Scott Brown Classic. Pretty high level tournament. Jim Justice used to put that on. Friends of Cole Bowl or something. I forget what they called it exactly, but anyway, we played Buffalo, and in this tournament over at Beckley on a Wednesday night in the championship game over there, and we beat them by 32 points. We had a regularly scheduled game with them that happened to fall on the following Friday night, and on that Friday night, on an inbounds play on the last second of the game, they got a layup and beat us 74-72. And I said, I told the kids right there, then and there, that night, listen, you can't, anybody's capable of beating you. You're capable of beating anybody, but it's the mental approach that you take and how you go into things, and how you go into games. And that was a lesson well learned for us, and I think it benefited us in the long run because we won like 11 straight games after that, but taught us a valuable lesson. And I think that's what you have to do. You got to look forward. And speaking of Chuck Elkins, I brought that up because the reason it's on my mind is he's been diagnosed with a pretty serious illness, dementia illness, and is struggling mightily right now. And I wanted to mention that anyway on the air, but that has been on my mind. And the funny thing about it is, every time I would see Chuck afterwards, it's ironic. And him and my son coached a little bit together in West Virginia Wesleyan a few years back. And every time I would see him, he would just start grinning. And I didn't have to say, "What are you grinning about?" He knew that I knew exactly why he was grinning. And later on in my life, I often thought, did I get was the pleasure I got from seeing him beaming,
Yeah.
grinning, better more than the hurt that came from the loss that he gave us that night. And I think his enjoyment and pleasure uh, means more to me now, obviously, than that did back then. Just due to the circumstances now. But yeah, I always remember that. And that's a good example of why you have to focus on the next one and not the last one. So hopefully the Mountaineers can do that and they get themselves righted as we open up this Big 12 play.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up. That was great you did that. I was thinking about the circumstances. I always say that, the context matters. And it's one thing when a baseball team or any team is not going well, but then you're in the postseason, which has its own sense of drama, and it's tough to make that turn. And we'll just keep our fingers crossed tomorrow against Cincinnati, knowing that we beat them 3 times. But I was thinking about that last night as I was watching Michigan State, Nebraska, and they were playing in the Big Ten tournament out in Omaha, and Nebraska playing at home. Really, they're in Lincoln, but it's only a stone's throw from Omaha. So most of the people in the stands are Nebraska Cornhuskers, and the Michigan State was the last team in the Big Ten to get into the Big Ten tournament, and they're ahead 4-3. It's the bottom of the 9th. Yep. And there's a guy on first play, I think first base it was, maybe second, but I think it was first base, 2 outs. And the Nebraska player gets up, hits a lazy ball to right field. The right fielder goes back, and it comes out of his glove.
Yep.
and the guy rounds the bases, ties the game. They got the 3rd out. Go to the 10th inning, and you know the end of the story, Greg.
Oh, yeah.
Nebraska came up and won the game. And so it's like, there's so much pressure. But we're going to keep our fingers crossed because this is one of the best Mountaineer baseball teams we've had ever. And they're so much fun to watch with great guys, great pitching, except for the downs here and there and consistent hitting. So we'll just keep our fingers crossed. Go ahead.
I'm sorry. One other thing I wanted to mention real quickly. I just read on the Metro News site that we had nine players are recognized with Big 12 honors. That just gives you an idea of what a good baseball team this is. And so, yeah, it's you just hope they can get this first one under their belt. I think if they do that, they're going to be fine. I apologize for messing around here. I have this machine attached to me. It makes some weird noises. So if you heard that weird noise, I promise you it was the machine and not me. So I had to take a second to turn that thing off. So I'll be getting texts and emails before long.
No.
Want to know what I had for dinner?
No, that's good. I see that our guest Tony is in the back room, and it's so good to see him. And you know this. I was thinking about this the other day, actually this morning, make an analogy here or a link that's going to be probably really lame. But, Jake Tapper has written this book that most people know about in terms of what happened at the end of the Biden presidency in terms of his health, because most of us saw that debate that didn't go so well. And, it's during times that we're not sure that you need an expert, someone who's done the research. And Jake Tapper and his colleague from Axios have done that. They've written a book, and they were being interviewed this morning. And I look at Tony the same way. He's the Jake Tapper of major college football. I see him laughing in the back room. But with all the craziness going on, why don't we? In fact, Darren, why don't we bring Tony in and I'll talk. And then I'll introduce him.
There he is.
Well, there he is. But, Tony, this is crazier than it's ever been. And you can't keep up with what's going on with the portal and the House settlement and so on. And so last week we had a great beat writer on, Keenan Cummings, who talked about what's happening with Mountaineer football, because we've had a city, the city of Morgantown is populated half, I think, with football players, the guys that have come in from the portal. And I think he's like at 130 players right now. Got to get down to 105. But, the national situation, and there's no one better than you to talk about this. So thank you so much for taking the time to be with us from Los Angeles, right? Oh,
Tony,
audio.
I think you're muted, Tony.
Yeah, audio.
Yep. Give him a second there to get his
Yeah.
Get unmuted. But yeah, and Frank, you and I have talked many times about this and what he's going to talk about, and it's so confusing. Well, we lost him.
We lost him.
Yep. So confusing for us, when you talk about the house settlement and all those things, unless you are, get up every day and work on that and study it. And, it's hard to understand what exactly is going on. And I'm looking forward. I hope we get his volume worked out there. I'm looking forward to hearing this from somebody who does know, because, as the average fan, I don't have a clue. I mean, I listen and try to figure out what's happening, but it helps.
Yeah. Let me just send him a note back there. Let me see, upper right audio control, so he can give that to him. He can see it. The system is not necessarily friendly if you haven't used it before. No. So Tony's trying to get his audio. He's got his video there. But what happens, and I ran into it a couple of weeks ago, maybe last week, 2 weeks ago it was, that you got to be still no audio. Well, we're going to try to get this done. We've had our share of technical issues, but sometimes what happens is, especially if you have an external mic, the way that Tony does, it's not connected to the StreamYard system, and you have to adjust it. Greg has a different system that he's listening to. I've got earphones. I've got an external mic. You can't see it, so you got to make sure that everything is connected. So we're going to have to see, because we're going to rely on Tony. Exactly what Greg said. Yeah. We're going to rely on Tony to give us the perspective, because you're right. I mean, it's just it's almost a full-time job to keep up with this.
Yeah, and even I mean, if you pay any attention at all to politics and that sort of thing, how confusing it is when there's bills being proposed and bills being voted on. It's so confusing to figure out what they're talking about. And I think they do that on purpose. But
yep. Yeah. So what's happening? You can't hear it, folks, but what's happening is that Darren's trying to get it worked out. Yeah, he's muted now. Nope, he's off. He's off. So we're continuing. Yeah, we apologize. This is we haven't faced this particular technology problem before, but they keep on popping up.
Get something new every week, Harris.
Yeah, I mean, it is. Yeah, yeah.
We think the house settlement's hard to figure out.
Yeah. And you would think that the biggest problem would be, you're in West Virginia, I'm in Michigan, and Tony's in California. That would be the problem, but that's just fine. The connections are fine. It's the audio, and usually it's the video, if anything. But we'll persevere. Tony has dropped off, and he'll be logging. He's coming right back in now, and let's see if he can get the audio. Doesn't seem like it's working.
Oh
yeah.
Hey.
Bring him in.
Yay.
It's amazing. Okay, very good.
be this or we were in trouble.
There he is.
All
Tony.
right, get it to work.
Well, I'm going to say this, and Greg can certainly amen it, is that it's worth the wait to have Tony with us. So we appreciate patience on your end and patience on the viewer side.
System.
And let me just do a plug, and then we'll talk with Tony. Is that anybody? I strongly recommend. We've got his TJ Altimore there on X, and it is a gold mine. It's like taking a college class in terms of what's happening in college football and where is it going. And it's just great to look at, to learn, to share, and it's a go-to place for me and so many others. So, Greg, we're just delighted to have Tony with us.
Absolutely. I just got off. I was reading some of his stuff today, and it's like I told you earlier. As the average fan, looking at these things, you know in your heart what you want to happen, but you really have no clue in your mind what is going to happen in the world of college sports. And it's things are so confusing right now, and so many things are coming down the pike that it's just hard to keep up with. And it's so nice to have someone like Tony that does keep up with it and does know the ins and outs of what's happening. So, Tony, we're
in a weird time right now.
Yeah, no doubt, no doubt.
Tony, if you were writing a headline in terms of trying to capture the essence of what's going on, maybe that's a good starting point. What's the headline?
The headline is, "Don't entrust your future to Ted Cruz and Tommy Tuberville." Who thought that was a good idea? I mean, really, can you think of like two? That's who's heading this up on the hill. So one of the things that they really need congressional help. And who they turn to? Literally the stupidest senator and the least popular one. The one whose own party talked on the Daily Show about how they could shoot him in the head and nobody would rat them out.
Yep, that's right.
And so these are the two individuals that the NCAA placed its faith in to get it the congressional legislation it needed. Why didn't they have? I mean, in all seriousness, what they should have done is gone to Katie Britt, Elizabeth Warren. Who's the lady? Deb Fisher, and I don't know, and Amy Klobuchar. Put them in charge of it, not Ted Cruz and Tommy Tuberville. Yeah. So, and to kind of back up from that, one of the issues that we're seeing right now, it's a huge problem, is that with the House settlement, they didn't actually agree in the House settlement to stop breaking the law. And that's the real problem, is that, and Judge Wilkin continually reminded them about this the whole time. She's like, you're settling for the law breaking that you've done, but you have no intention of not stopping breaking the law. And they're like, yeah, we'll figure it out. Well, they didn't figure it out. They didn't get the antitrust exemption that they need. And now they're just in a world of hurt. And it's all because, this is the big thing that is so dumb, is that if they will just admit that the players are employees, then they can negotiate with them and make all the rules they want, right? Like just like the NFL, you can make all the rules you want. You can negotiate, and it works out fine. But they will not admit that the players are employees. And the law says if they're not your employees, then you can't make rules that restrict their working. You can't restrict their income if they don't work for you, which is a good law. But the schools will not admit, and Judge Wilkin was like, we're giving you a $20 million payroll, and you still won't admit they're your employees. And schools are like, no, they're not our employees. We're not doing that, which is really, really silly. And I'll give you actually a really interesting parallel, and this is not to be political, but it kind of overlaps. In 2004, right when all the marriage bans were going into effect and all that kind of stuff, there was a psychologist who gave a really interesting thing. He said, this is just for a couple of years and this stuff's all going to go away completely. And everyone was like, we just saw this was not good at the ballot box. Like, what are you talking about? He said, well, like 90% of the country supports, at the time he said, supports civil unions, which means this is just a nomenclature thing. People are okay with the idea. They just have to get to the place where they can just stop being silly about it. And I thought, oh, we'll see about that. But sure enough, the guy was completely right. But I think that really applies to here, because the schools are saying, oh, we're not employees, not employees. And now you're starting to see a couple of schools be like, all these problems could go away if we just admitted they were employees. We wouldn't have to have a portal that opened every, people could transfer at will. Because again, if they're not your employees, you can't tell them when they can and can't transfer. Kids are going to go to, unlimited eligibility. You're seeing that in the lawsuits right now. They're sort of making an excuse. But the rule is really, if they're not your employees, you can't restrict them to 4 years of playing if that's how they're earning money. If somebody will pay them for a fifth year, you can't, you don't like tell your dentist that he has to retire at age 35. So, you can't, he doesn't work for you. So you can't you can't be like, dentist, I've decided you're going to retire next year. And it's the same thing with football players. As long as you won't admit they're your employees, then you're sort of stuck in this. And they're just in this cycle of refusing to admit that they kind of have to get there. And now it's become another issue because the NCAA, and remember, by the way, remember also the NCAA is an illegal cartel, just like the De Beers Diamond Mine or OPEC. Like, right, it is a cartel of the schools. And the schools like to hide behind the NCAA, like the NCAA is a thing. But it's really not, because the NCAA is the schools. So, like, blaming something on the NCAA is like, your kid's mad at you, and you're like, well, that's up to the parents' council. And the kid would be like, well, that's you and mom. And that's the same thing the NCAA really is. It is the schools. And with very few exceptions, like Penn in 1951, Oklahoma in the 80s, I guess you can probably argue SMU. Very few people have ever really stood up to the NCAA and said, your rules are wrong. Your rules are illegal. And so because of that, like, none of these schools have an argument to say that, like, the NCAA has imposed anything on them. It's the schools were all down for everything that happened. But right now we're starting to see an issue because Tennessee, for example, does not think that they're going to get what they need to with Congress. They're going to end up right back in court, sued for antitrust on day one, because again, they're not stopping violating the law. So we're going to get hit. So Tennessee has said, we're not going to restrict incomes. We're not going to agree to the salary cap unless you get permission for it, because it's against the law. So Tennessee's in sort of bringing a world of hurt. Now remember, Tennessee is the one too who opened the whole transfer portal, because when Tennessee was getting in trouble for cheating at recruiting, again, we say cheating, it's legal behavior in the law, but it's against the NCAA rules, which were illegal rules, but they were the rules. Tennessee went rushing in with like U.S. attorneys from like 3 states to sue the NCAA to get an injunction to say you can't have these rules anymore, because Tennessee didn't want to get in trouble for having broken them. And now Tennessee is really sticking up for it to say, we're going to hold you to either having an antitrust exemption or following the law, which is the Sherman Act. And it's getting to be really, really interesting and really kind of dicey here, because a lot of the schools don't want to do either one. But to some of these schools, like West Virginia, I don't know your laws. Travis would know this better than I do. I would guess you guys have some kind of limits in there tied to the fact that the school's a government organization. But it's the Notre Dames and the USCs and the Northwesterns and the Stanfords and half the ACC for the private schools, where they don't have any government protection. So they have to do what the law says. So it's going to be really interesting now as we go into this. And the House settlement, by the way, is still, I don't know if you guys know this, it's still not approved.
Sure.
And this is either now Beth Wilkinson is their lawyer, and Beth Wilkinson, who was like a famous partner at Paul Weiss, she has her own firm now. She's like one of the best lawyers in the country. I don't think Beth Wilkinson is stupid, because I know she's genius. But somebody in the world of the NCAA and the conferences thought that it was a good idea when the senior judge of the Northern District of California says, you have to do this. And they're like, nah, we don't care. Because she said to them when they were, because of the roster limit, she said, you have to have a process for grandfathering kids in. And they were like, nah, we're good. And she was like, oh, maybe you misunderstood that as a suggestion. But like Article 3 judges don't make suggestions from the bench in your settlement negotiation. They're, she's not like telling you, oh, you look good in the blue. No, she was telling you to put in a grandfathering clause. So they did just finally put one in to try to get the settlement approved. But yeah, if they do get it approved, and they're marching ahead with it, like they need to, because they need to. They're setting up a whole new organization that's going to run clearinghouses. Deloitte, my old firm, different part of the firm that I worked in, but Deloitte is going to be actually doing the analysis of the NIL deals to make sure they're legit. But again, the rule that says legit or not is a violation of the Antitrust Act, of the Sherman Act. So how are they going to do that? Nobody knows.
Well, sorry, Frank. I just wanted to say, well, number one, it sounds like they take their, out of the I don't want to get political, but out of another person's playbook where you just go ahead and break the law and don't worry about it and see what happens and you get away.
Well, and by the way, there's another huge whole issue in that with Title IX, because the new administration came in, dropped a nuclear bomb on the Department of Education, is a smoldering pile of rubble just about right now, and just said, "Oh, we're not going to enforce anything with that," just like they're doing with a lot of other laws. And it's a really interesting. And again, this is not political, but there are lawyers saying like, "Hey guys, they didn't change the law; they just said they don't care about it," and that doesn't mean the law went away. So there's a whole nother realm of Title IX stuff that's a really interesting question as well. That's just completely, and again, because and one of the things, I don't know if you guys, we may have even talked about this. I said 2 years ago, why wasn't Kathy Lahannon? Kathy Lahannon is a civil rights lawyer. She's actually awesome. Some sports people don't like her. They don't like her ideas, but she's an awesome person. She's a brilliant lawyer. And she was Assistant Secretary for Civil Rights or whatever it was. And she should have been in this House discussion. She should have been part of putting this all together. They had nobody from the Department of Education helping put this settlement together. And I think, and I could be totally wrong, and so don't hold me to it. I think that they were hoping that this guy would win, and then they wouldn't have to follow any rules anymore. Which is, by the way, what also happened with the employees issue, because the Dartmouth labor relations rule came down. It said Dartmouth basketball players had to be classified as employees. USC was getting waterboarded in their hearing when the election happened. USC was about to get flushed down the toilet in USC looked like idiots in their hearing. I love my Trojans, but we look like idiots in our hearing trying to justify why our basketball players weren't employees. And then, they just blew up the NLRB, so it's fine. The case got dropped. So, but again, the law didn't change. So at some point in the very near future, all this stuff can come roaring back if you have a government that actually cares about the laws, or a government that's, if you don't have a government that's willing to change the laws, which they've passed, one bill, I think, since the new Congress started 5 months ago? Yeah. Was it two? No, they had two. They did a funding bill and the Lake and Riley bill. So two laws or whatever I think they've done since the new Congress came in. So they're not going to rewrite Title IX. They're not going to rewrite the National Labor Relations Act or the Sherman Act. So we really have to get the NCAA to start doing stuff. And by the NCAA, I don't mean I mean the schools, because it's the schools that are doing it. We just have to get the schools to follow the law.
So what do you think? Do you think? They have to know that. What do you think?
I would think so, because you know where the law schools are? Oh yeah, in all of these colleges.
Right. But is it? Are they just playing ignorant, or are they holding out for another reason? I would think that looking at this settlement, if it does come to fruition, like you said, it's going to come again and again and again, unless they do something different. We'll get a different result. Keep doing the same thing over and over. But you would think that they are smart enough to look at that and say, one of the things with higher ed, it's not a very proactive industry, right? It's a very much let's wait, don't in fact, the president of USC used to have a great saying, don't decide today what you don't have to decide until tomorrow. And that wasn't about procrastinating. It was about the world may change. Right.
So that's kind of a very higher ed line of thinking, because who knows what the world, and also, by the way, they're a little bit spoiled because for 100 years they've been breaking the law and getting away with it.
That's right.
And so they've been kind of don't figure it out. it'll work out. And now the reason they got away with it was for, I don't know if you guys know this, but for 70 years or whatever, their philosophy was, we will fight you, tooth and nail. We will get in the dirt and drag you into the mud in court for longer than you're going to be in college. So it won't do you any good. They did that with Jeremy Bloom. Do you guys remember Jeremy Bloom?
No.
Jeremy Bloom is like the best case of NIL in the world. He was an amazing punt returner for Colorado. Just like the best punt returner and one of the better wide receivers in the country. He went on to play for the Eagles for a little bit. He was also world champion and Olympian in mogul skiing and a Tommy Hilfiger and Abercrombie and Fitch model. Like, remember those like shirtless Abercrombie? He was one of those guys. And so they were saying to him, you can't have your pro skiing money because you're a wide receiver at Colorado. He was like, you don't understand. I'm a pro skier. Like, oh, you can't take that modeling money for the cover of Abercrombie magazine because, you're a Colorado. And so he tried to take him to court and would have won. But they said to Colorado, they were like, well, just so you know, we're going to forfeit all the game. Every game he steps in that field, you forfeit. If you want to take us to court in 7 years and get a win back, go for it. That's how the NCAA, they did this sort of gangster legal stuff. Well, gangster legal stuff works until the Supreme Court hands you your ass in a 9-0 ruling. A ruling so bad that Brett Kavanaugh, not a paragon to workers' rights, but Brett Kavanaugh actually came in with a hysterical concurring opinion that said, we can only give the athletes what they've asked for in this lawsuit. But you should bring us more because the NCAA is that bad. So, yeah, I mean, these are the people that got, like, Ruth Bader Ginsburg and Brett Kavanaugh, together. They got Clarence Thomas and Sonia Sotomayor as, like, best friends. And so to be that bad, like, that's how egregious you are. And once that happens, you can't keep up the fight anymore because now it's boom. The minute somebody sues, they get an injunction because the gig is up. And so I think the schools are too used to being able to play games and have it work.
No, Tony, you're absolutely correct. As you were talking, I was thinking about Walter Byers, who was the executive director of the NCAA that took the NCAA from we're really an Olympic sport type organization to there's a ton of money out there. Now, how can we get it? I mean, Greg and I grew up in an era where this is a true story that Michigan State played Notre Dame in 1966. The game was called the game of the century because the winner of that game would be number one in the country. Now, UCLA had one more game left against your alma mater, USC, the next week, and they won the game. That would game to be crowned number one, but that game of the century was 10-10. Well, the reason I bring it up is that because Notre Dame had already been on television once that year, that game could not be on national television. That's how much power the NCAA had. So Walter Byers comes in. One of the first things he does is he gets his gaggle of attorneys, and one of the first rulings they advised him on was these players are not employees. So they had to come up with a term. And the term they came up with was student athletes. Okay? Yeah. And they did that to skirt labor laws, et cetera, et cetera. And you're absolutely correct. Historically, what we'll do is if you try to cross us, we're going to take you to court and we're going to win. Now, what's interesting,
because we can make this go on for 4 years.
That's right. The end of the story is in 1995, Walter Byers, who by that time I think was about 85, wrote his autobiography. And basically what he said is, I effed up. I should have never done that. And the title of the book was Unsportsmanlike Conduct. So he basically said he rue the day that he did what he did. And he said, the theme of the book was, look, if you're smart, you'll not keep on the path that we're on right now. And I'll stop here. I think what I take away, Greg, from what Tony's saying, we're taking this House settlement. Nobody knows who House is. It's a person. but we're
He's
focusing
a
on the word.
swimmer from Arizona State. And by the way,
That's true.
he didn't really sue them. He was a really gregarious, kind of larger than life swimmer from ASU who was like, I think he was president of, I don't know, the student government or the student athlete association or whatever, just a really kind of like lively, gregarious guy. And his friend's mother was one of the attorneys or something. And so he was recruited to be the plaintiff. He didn't start this.
Yeah. But we're focusing on
really quick. You want a funny laugh in that Michigan State game?
Yeah. Pardon?
So,
oh yeah. Go ahead, please.
My dad was on those teams, and he played on the Rose Bowl team the year before, and then he was a GA assistant on the 66 team, and they just put them in the Michigan State Hall of Fame this year individually, which was a big deal. No team has ever been put in as like individuals, like all collectively together in the Hall of Fame there. And we're sitting there at Breslin Center on the floor of the arena, and the AD was an African-American guy, is in tears talking about the role that team played in the integration of the game. And he's like, I would not have this job today if not for these teams. And I'm sitting there, and I mean, I do lots of research on football stuff, and I had a bunch of books on my dad's teams, and but I read them a couple times. I was like, it's Mr. Gallagher. Oh, that's Coach Streeter. That's Coach Probstall. And I just think of him as like, oh, that's Mr. Probstall. And it never really sunk into me until then. I was like, oh my God, of all the teams I have not really researched nearly enough, how about my dad's?
Yeah.
It turned out to be super important. Who knew? Yeah. My mom's like, everyone. That's
Tony's dad is a legend at Michigan State, but also very much so in high school football coaching in Michigan. The interesting thing about it, we're all focusing on the settlement, the House settlement. And what we're getting from you tonight is, oh, wait a minute now, nothing's really going to be settled. The
thing is, by the way, it could. I mean, it could work out. I've had some interesting discussions with folks in Washington. And I'll tell you that some of the folks in some of the House and Senate offices had very different views than some of the stuff that I expected. So, one of the things that one of the Senate offices I talked to was they were really interested in making sure they believe that football and basketball players are disproportionately students of color, and they think that students of color have been kind of ripped off, unquestionably, over the years of free labor, and they are okay with more than you would think if it's going to try to help resolve some of that. I talked to other offices were like, actually, this stuff can be a really incredible like anti-poverty program for families in sports. Like they're looking at some of this stuff as really advantageous to the school. But one of the things that they're really worried about, and this is a whole nother thing, by the way, is like we're focused here on sports. Higher ed is in the middle of a hurricane right now, a financial hurricane. And they are really, really worried about where is this money going to come from? Because, and not as much, I mean, WVU, you guys have your boosters and your community, like WVU, you guys will work it out, but like Marshall, like the MAC schools, the Sunbelt schools. I mean, the Sunbelt schools are just spending, some of them are spending 20% of their entire school budget is subsidizing athletics. And so there's going to come a point, and by the way, that money means that is student loans. Like the student loan crisis is paying for sports. And so there are people in Washington really worried about like, hey, we're fine with you paying the athletes, right? But like, you're not gonna the federal government's not gonna finance it through student loans, so that you can outbid Tennessee for a quarterback, and that's going to be a real problem, I think. And also the debt load, like the debt load is going up, and all of this while enrollments are plunging right now because next year, we have a declining birth rate in the U.S. That's why it's kind of stupid that we're getting rid of working people from our employment age. We need people of working employment age because our birth rate is going down. But when the financial recession hit in 2008, the financial crisis, a lot of people that would have had kids put it off. So there's something like, I don't know, it's like 15% fewer kids were born in like 2008 or whatever than would have normally been born. It depends on the state. It varies and some stuff like that. But basically those kids who weren't born in 2008 are therefore not going to college in 2026. And so all kinds of schools are going to get hit with not enough kids to fill them up. Now, what'll happen is, Harvard will grab whoever they want and fill it up all the way. And then, I don't know, Michigan and will grab theirs and fill it up all the way. And then West Virginia will grab theirs. And there's going to be kind of like a, constant like grabbing down to fill up. But once you get a little bit further down, there's not going to be enough anymore. And you look at like the MAC schools, there are MAC schools that are off 40% of enrollment in the last 15 years.
Wow.
Like MAC schools are, 60% of the size they were 15, 20 years ago. So, how much lower can some of these enrollments go? Because again, you're thinking about like athletics is a fixed cost. That's why Arizona State Arizona State like lives wonderfully because Michael Crow, who's probably the best university president in the country. He's the guy like Palantir. He like funded that for the CIA when he was running the CIA's venture capital fund, like just as a side thing. Like, guy's a genius. But Arizona State's got 120,000 students. And I don't even know if that includes the online, because Arizona State has an online program that's better than most regular schools. Anyway, so they have, you're sitting there 120,000 kids. Yeah, you can eat the cost of the athletic department. It's not a big deal. But when you got 10,000 kids and now you're down to 8, now you got an issue. And that's going to be a real crisis. So you got the swirling of enrollment, you've got the messes of sports, you've got the plunging birth rate, and now you all of a sudden have the government came in and just like started cutting all the funding for schools. And all the grants, that go to the medical stuff, the support for hospitals. So they just started slashing those funds. And then they have a thing called indirect, which is how they fund research, which was like, it's like 50% of whatever you get. And that means that pays for your facilities and the support. And it's basically a cheaper way. People think it's a graft. It's not a graft. It's just a cheaper way of not having to account for all the little side expenses. Well, they just slashed all that. So which means that schools have to like eat all those like facility costs, support costs, and all that. So schools are getting creamed on research. And then you've got the government is sort of like playing political games. And so they went on an attack against 60 schools, about 12 of which they went on a serious attack against. And those were all in the Ivy League and the Big Ten. But the others are in ACC, Big 12. They're all kinds of places. So to whatever degree the government chooses to play this like attack game against colleges, that's just another, kick in the crotch to these schools on financials when we're trying to find, $20 million to pay for quarterbacks and give more scholarships.
Greg, what you just said, Tony, is so true because these things are connected. So when we look at athletics, we think of college sports as hermetically sealed. It's not. And so, everything, I'm not going to repeat what Tony said. He said it absolutely correct. That has huge implications for what happens on the gridiron in the basketball court because of these cuts. And it's just.
Well, and by the way, that stuff tends to throw off money too. Like, having a big, I'm sure you guys probably have a big healthcare system, right? There's probably like big signs that we're like the doctors of West Virginia or, whatever it is. That's a way that the school basically funnels money from the giant, very profitable healthcare system to the athletic department. So all that stuff really creates a rising tide that like helps float athletics. And when that stuff is funding it's not that like you don't use research money for sports, but if you have a lot of research money, then you can use other money for sports. But if the research money's cut and you want to keep doing your biochemical whatever, does the quarterback money now go to biochemical stuff? So there's a really, really big growing crisis that like this is just sort of like the worst time ever. And then the last piece that's really interesting is that there's a cycle of funding that used to happen. And if you go back to like the 60s or the 50s, like I've seen interesting charts in this. It's fascinating, but there's a whole cycle of, colleges are funded by the state. And then when there's a rough time financially and the state has to like cough in with tax revenue goes down, they need to come up with Medicare, they need to come up with Medicaid, unemployment and all that. Then they sort of cut the money for the schools and schools get a budget cut. And so then the schools raise tuition and it causes a drama. And then, over the next few years, the state sort of starts refunding the schools again. And, okay, we'll keep tuition down now. And it's kind of like been this cycle that's gone on from like the 60s until about 2010. Well, when the 2008 recession hit, the same thing happened. States cut the money for schools, but it didn't come back.
That's right.
So it's weird. It's the first time that the state money didn't come back. I mean, the University of Michigan is essentially a private school. Michigan gets less of its money from the government than a lot of other places do, and so than private schools do, actually. So it's a really interesting situation now where you have very, very little state funding going to these schools, and states are in crisis right now financially as well. And that they may do a thing. So this was the whole Project 2025. That you can like it or not, but there's a really interesting situation there where they wanted to just start giving the states block grants. But they haven't really planned this out. They haven't really budgeted for it. But it was essentially said it's kind of like these a lot of kind of dickwad people. But their whole thing was like, instead of giving instead of like the National Institutes of Health deciding like in a broader health policy way, we're going to give this $100 million to West Virginia. They're just going to, the federal government would just give West Virginia a bunch of money and say, fund whatever you want. And that tends to not work very well. It tends to usually be poorly spent. It tends to not plan very well, but also we don't know what's going to happen. Like they didn't really plan this out very well. So they weren't like, oh, hey, states, so next year you're going to get X amount of money in block grants and then you can give it away. Because you know what happened in Alabama, right? They would just they would screw the HBCUs and just like give it all to like Bama and just enough to Auburn to keep them quiet. So that's you think about it that way. Like, and that would probably be a good thing for the University of Alabama. Like, okay, we'll take it and, rip off a couple schools and give them all to our favorite child over here. And I mean, so some schools might come out ahead with that, but with what they're doing, they've chopped a lot of this money and they're using it to pay for billionaire tax cuts. If you're a billionaire, congratulations, you're getting a nice tax cut. But if you're a college, sorry, but your money's not coming to you. And so that's all just another kick that, at the time when these schools are trying to fund sports, because the other thing is debt. So all these schools are also accumulating debt that most of them aren't paying down. So for example, Georgia Tech, they did a renovation of their stadium like 15 years ago or something, I don't know, 18, whenever it was. And they haven't paid down any of that debt. Now, some of that may have to do with the fact you don't pay down bonds like you pay down a mortgage, just like structurally. But Georgia Tech still has all of the debt on its books from that stadium renovation, and they don't have money to pay for it. But now they're getting to the point where they kind of need another one, but they still have the loan from the last one. It's like if you get a car loan and you wear your car out, but you don't pay down the loan, now you got a problem. And schools are facing that problem right now with debt. UCLA just wrote off, which is actually a good thing because they should have. But UCLA just wrote off $100 million debt to the athletic department. Arizona State refinanced $350 million of debt. Also, there's a bunch of real estate stuff in there, so it was actually Arizona State's fine, but Arizona State finally stepped in and said, we're going to stop managing the athletic department like a business. We're going to manage the athletic department like the rest of the school, where you have income and you have expenses. They're all our income and they're all our expenses. We are going to decide how much you get. So that's actually a really interesting model. I mean, that's what a lot of the private schools do. And so I think you may see more of that coming. Or you may see more of the schools doing what like Florida State did, which is to try to like start to separate the athletic department from the school a little bit. Mm-hmm. So like Florida State is now running their athletic department very much as more of a separate entity. Whenever you mention the Florida State, there's always like angry people typing into comments. I'm sure they'll tell us what nuance of detail applies. But because the other thing that is concerning to people too, to some of these schools, is again we're paying this multi-billion-dollar settlement for breaking the law, but we're going to keep breaking the law. So they're a little concerned about school liability. Like one of the things Danny White was talking about at Tennessee that they're worried about is he's like, we don't want to get sued for violating the Sherman Act. So that I think is going to be a really interesting thing to see, kind of what happens here, especially the private schools. Because again, the private schools don't have the advantage of of a state to hide behind.
You mentioned a couple of things there that made me think. I think you're already seeing. You talk about the enrollments and that sort of thing. You're already seeing that on the on the low level, NAIA schools. I know my son coaches in the NAIA, and the former conference that they were in. Several of the schools in there just shut down, just closed the doors, and that was the problem. They just didn't have the enrollment, and they couldn't. They would first eliminate sports and that sort of thing, and start cutting programs, and before you know it, the whole place shut down. And that's happened to 2 or 3 of them since he's been coaching there last 6 or 7 years. So it's already affecting these lower levels. Another thing you mentioned that I found interesting, you was talking about, doing the health industry part of it. There's always a big question around here about WVU and their expansion in the health areas. And if you look around this state and Ohio, Pennsylvania, Kentucky, everywhere you look, you see a WVU medicine building, a hospital or a clinic or a doctor's office. And, that is possibly, part of this is that, that's where the money's coming from. And they're expanding as fast as they can to try to draw in more of that money. So I think we're seeing those things. Most people obviously probably don't pay attention to that, but now that you mentioned it, yeah. I was going to say I hadn't thought of that until you said what you said there, and I thought, you know what? You look around the state, there's WVU medicine things popping up everywhere, and even I just had a extended stay at a hospital in Charleston. Well, it turns out I didn't know it, but that hospital's part of WVU medicine now. I saw it on one of the doctor's lapels, and I'm like, "This is WVU." And he's like, "Yeah."
I had a really fascinating discussion once with I mouthed off in a meeting with the president of the university, and my penance was to chair the committee to fix the problem. So that was my penance. I like the best, like people got up and they were clapping. Like I was being a complete bitch. And I got a huge glare, and then I was nominated like chairman of the committee to fix it. And so I had to talk to Edna about it. It was actually fascinating because we were talking about some numbers for some things. And the Edna people were like, well, yeah, but you own the hospital, so it's a lot cheaper. I was like, oh, and I started to like see like what it like. It's good to own hospitals, guys. Trust me, it's good to own a medical empire.
I guarantee you.
That's right.
I learned. I was like, these are not the numbers I expected. And the university, the executive VP was like, yeah, no, it's good. It's fine.
Yeah. After I saw my hospital bill, I understand that completely.
Yeah, that's right. Hey, Tony, we know that no matter what's going to happen, and it's who can predict what's going to happen tomorrow. And we're lucky in West Virginia to have a very good athletic director in Ren Baker. By the way,
he was great at North Texas. Like when he got that job, I was so excited. Yeah. I was like, oh, he's going to be good.
Yeah. I just mentioned to one of the persons on the chat that AD you talked about at Michigan State. Probably about a week after that, he was let go. And
it was like a year later or whatever. It was he's I don't know much of the details. I was a little surprised by that, but I don't know. My dad says there's lots of political drama there. He knows better than I do.
It was not fundraising for the most part. Donors stepped forward and wanted to be more aggressive. And one of the things that I think is funny, they recommended that they should go to Nick Saban, and he would be the AD. And I think if Nick maybe consumed a couple cases of beer, he might take that job. But,
I'll tell you a really funny laugh really quick. You guys have just a sec. So when I was in high school, and the coaches and the Michigan coaches were really good friends of my dad too. Like my dad got Lloyd Carr drunk for the first time as a quarterback recruit at Michigan State. So he was good friends. Whenever they want to talk to my dad about something, the easiest way to do that would be to just put me on the recruit list. And then they could talk to my dad. So at the game where Nick Saban beat Michigan for the first time, I was like, I don't know, 16 or 15 or whatever. 5'9", probably like 140-pound running back. And the offensive coordinator, the defensive coordinator, and director of football operations are talking to me and my dad. Well, they're not talking to me. They're like, oh, tell your mom I said hi. And they're talking to my dad about what are we going to do against Penn State's tight ends? Stop in the flat. So they're talking about, and Coach Saban walks up and we're talking, and there's a lady with a son who has to be like 7 feet tall, like just a mountain, from Detroit Martin Luther King. Had a jacket on from Detroit Martin Luther King, which is like one of the best football teams in the state at the time. And she is just shooting me the evil eye glare. That, like, here's her like giant mountain of a 7-foot son, and like 5'9", like buck 40 nothing over here has got the like Saban and the offensive coordinator and the defensive coordinator and Hank Bullock. So anyway, so I walk up to the buffet while they're talking about Penn State. And she walks over to me and she goes, "Hey," I said, "Yeah," and it's like sort of like very like kind of bossy, Detroit mom. She goes, "Are you a kicker?" I was like, I just do whatever the team needs.
It's great.
It was hard to be like, I'm like maybe the number two tailback on a good day.
There you go.
Yeah, they're talking to me. They're talking to my dad about Penn State.
One of the things we wanted to talk with you about, we know no matter what happens, and a lot probably will, the Big Ten and the SEC will try to direct it. But obviously in Morgantown,
I think it's a good thing.
Well, we're interested in the Big 12. So your thoughts about where you think the Big 12 is going to, if you put it in the crystal ball, where's the Big 12 5 years from now?
So I think the Big 12 is in a good spot right now. By the way, one of the things, though, that your fans will not believe me on, you guys want the ACC to succeed too. You both want to succeed. Like, you and the ACC are like the should be partners in crime and tight, just like the SEC and the Big Ten are being. And I know your fans like to think in like we want to attack, we want to steal Louisville. Like, that's a bad idea. Like, a strong ACC is good for the Big 12. So what I really see the Big 12 doing is the ACC is going to make a financial bifurcation. Like, they're doing this new sort of split in funding. So there's going to be ACC teams making a lot more money than you, and there's going to be ACC teams making less money than you, and you're going to be kind of in the middle. Now, on average, and some of your fans are having a meltdown about this on the internet, but on average, their contract is going to be like a little more than your contract on average. Not a big deal, because like the other things are a bigger piece of that. Like one thing about the Big 12 is they fill their stadiums better than the ACC. So like, you're going to be, they might get a little more TV money. You're getting more stadium money. It's fine. Like, you guys are good. But I think you guys in the ACC are in a really good place. I think having the 4 new schools that joined from the Pac-12, I think are going to be really good for you guys. They fit like West Virginia. Like, they fit West Virginia and Kansas and Texas Tech. Like, those are big schools with big fans and big names that people watch on TV. And I think having 4 more of those makes a big difference for the Big 12 that I think leaves you in a really solid place. It leaves you in a really solid place academically. It leaves you in a really solid place sports-wise. It gives you programming across the time zones. Like, it's a really good thing for the conference. But with the Big Ten and the SEC doing their thing, you don't want to be the only one out. So you don't want to have I know some fans like they have like voodoo dolls and they do doomsday dances to pray for the rain to wash away the ACC, but you don't want that, because I think a strong ACC makes the Big 12 strong. In fact, if you could even get a best thing for you guys too would be for the new Pac-12 to be decent. With Boise and Fresno, they could be. The more good teams that are demanding there be a seat at the table, the better, is what I think. And by the way, I think that's good for the sport overall, just in general. But I don't like. So the other thing is, if you guys can, if the ACC. So there was a really interesting thing with the ACC. I don't know all the details. I don't know who told Florida State to follow a really bad legal strategy. I don't know who told Florida State they sort of had opportunities that they didn't. Greg Sankey fired shots over the bow to try to warn them to knock it off, and they didn't. But there's university presidents right now that do not consider Florida State to be a good partner. They're like, look what you did, and you threw tantrums in court. And so I don't know what's going to happen. The best thing for the Big 12 would be for Florida State and Clemson to stay in the ACC. your leagues to both be strong and both be like both warrant a seats at the table. And I think you're in a better position that way.
Great.
Well,
But you guys are going to like, and you guys are going to like Arizona State, Arizona, Colorado, Utah. Like those schools fit with West Virginia in a good way. Like their schools like big state schools, big fan. I mean, they're all different. Arizona State is its own planetary universe. I love them, but they are. And so you guys, like, you'll kind of laugh at them. Like they all have their like eccentricities. All the Pac schools have eccentricities that are like, you're like, how did I used to tease a Kansas State friend. I was like, you really don't want to join this conference. You hate this conference. I promise. But you guys will really grow to like them. But I think that they'll be good for you and a lot of fun, and also some great games.
So when you see this, and I know we're running a little short of time here, but when you see this, all this unfolding, with the house settlement and all that, I know that's not the end of everything, but
it could be. It could be like, I mean, they could Congress could fix that tomorrow and then be done. Or what may happen is, he may write one of these lawless executive orders, which has the same force of law as if I like write it on this napkin. But it might be enough to stall it for a few years and then you're okay.
He writes
I say that I'm not being sarcastic. Like, one of the things that I think the sport needs is it needs a chance to breathe. It needs a chance to settle into this new stuff. And so if you could hold off lawsuits for a couple of years, that would probably be a good thing.
Mm-hmm.
So 3 or 4 years from now, I guess is what I'm saying is, do you see all this? Do you see this calming down some, the transfer portal, all these things that are involved right now? Do you see it all kind of calming down and us getting back to, I wouldn't say normalcy, but getting back to something that we're a little more used to or can relate to a little more?
So the big thing is the portal will not calm down until they declare them employees, because it's making rules for people that aren't your employees. Yeah. So I think that they're going to want the portal to calm down, and the way that they're going to get that is they're just going to admit that they're employees, and then they can negotiate a much more calm sort of portal situation. So that I think would be really good for them. I think that they need the portal to calm down. The realignment, the like grave uncertainty, I think will calm down, and that's a good thing. Which is why, like, tell your like YouTubers and your your Twitter people, like don't make up realignment rumors like some of them like to do, just like, because we need a little stability. Again, that's why I think that this this ACC thing is good, because it calls off a little bit of this, like all this, the ACC doomsday, which again, maybe it is and maybe it's not. Florida State tried really hard and nobody wanted them. So again, I'm not, they may next time. So you've got, I think the realignment stuff calming down would be really good. I think, you guys have to integrate 8 new teams. Like, I can't imagine the cultural, logistical, just like, getting everything in the groove of 8 new teams in a conference. That's got to be unbelievable. I know the Big Ten's overwhelmed with 4. So I can't even imagine with 8. So, that kind of stuff, like it takes a little while to, sort of get everything in the groove. I think it's a good thing. I think it's good for culture. If we can get a little stability. And I there's also a thing, and this is just my opinion, I could be totally wrong. I don't think the Big Ten or the SEC want anyone from the ACC other than Notre Dame. The Big Ten has wanted Notre Dame forever. But Notre Dame is like, the like girl you met once in high school that you think you'd marry today, but she has no idea who you are. That's like that's the Big Ten and Notre Dame. So other than Notre Dame, and by the way, Notre Dame is doing everything it can to help keep the ACC afloat, which is a good thing. Good thing for the sport. And so, like, I don't think that they want to take from that conference. Everyone's like, oh, well, they want to get into this market, into that. It reminds me of one of my uncles used to live on a lake in northern Michigan, and there was like a huge plot of land right next to them, completely undeveloped, that this guy they knew owned. And they had the best thing in the world because they didn't have to own the land. but they could snowmobile on it, and they like helped take care of it for them a little bit. And no one lived there. There was no house. It was great. But like eventually there was going to come a time when that land would be developed, and then they'd have people everywhere, or they'd have to go out and buy the property, which they didn't really want to. It would be a lot of money, and they didn't really want to do that either, like 50 acres or whatever on a lake. So, it's sort of like, how long can we just keep this good thing going a little bit? And I think that's how the Big Ten and the SEC feel about, like, you hear about North Carolina, you hear about Clemson, like whatever. Like, I think that they would really like if the ACC was imploding, would they go get some? Yeah, they would. But would they really rather they just stay in the ACC and be happy there? I think they would, given the choice.
Yeah. Great stuff. I believe I can sit and listen to this all night long. I've learned a lot here, and that's a little doom and gloom, but I think there's a light at the end of the tunnel. And
there is. And by the way, just so that everybody knows too, just to keep in mind too, like this stuff was always going to happen. Like, and in fact, it should have happened in 1951. So the first lawsuit to dismantle the antitrust thing was in 1951. Two schools had their own live TV contract. I mean, this was before houses had TV. Two schools had live TV contracts: Notre Dame and the Penn Quakers. And Penn had a bigger stadium than Michigan until the Big House got expanded. The first double-decker stadium in the country, Franklin Field, like where the Eagles fans like nailed Santa with snowballs. That was at Penn because like their stadium was big and fabulous. Penn played like 9 home games a year because everybody wanted to come to there because you got more money. You were on the new TV and you got 80,000 people in the stands. And so when the NCAA took TV back, Penn sued on antitrust, and they were going to win. And it was a whole big mess, and they got in a huge fight. And essentially, the part of the settling of this whole fight was how the Ivy League was actually created as a league. Started in like 1954, and part of that was Penn dropped the lawsuit. So and then Oklahoma, it basically took the Penn lawsuit, wrote their name on the top, and turned it into Supreme Court. It was the same argument; it didn't change in 35 years. So all of this stuff was going to happen eventually anyway. But we'll see if Congress does anything.
Yeah.
Whew. That's a scary thought that we have to keep put our hopes in Congress. It's scary to think about. But,
well, that was somebody and I forget who it was. It was a Big 12 fan. It might have been like Texas Tech. It was somebody on a show that had an accent. I forget. And there was like some there was some hearing on the Hill, and it was like somebody from the Pac-12 and somebody from the SEC or whatever. And some guy called, and he's like, I can't do the accent, but he's like, if there are 3 organizations I do not trust the future of our sport with, it would be the SEC, the Pacific 12, and the United States Congress.
I think most,
you got a point.
Yeah, I think most college sports fans probably feel that way.
That's right.
I was like, I like this guy. He just ripped. We were still in the back going. Like, he just ripped up my conference, but he's got a good point. I agree with him.
Tony, I'll tell you what, we appreciate this. This has been it's been wonderful to get all this information, and I know our audience has truly enjoyed it. It's been a blast talking to you and hearing from you, and I wish we had 2 or 3 more hours we could do this, and I know you wish that too. But,
LWV.
There you go. But Frank and I really do appreciate you.
We'll see you guys. Absolutely. Thank you, guys.
Thank you, right. Tony. Bye-bye.
All right, Tony. Thanks,
Anytime.
Tony. All right, bye-bye. Wow. I tell you what, I know we only got 30, 40 minutes with him, but learned a lot right there in a short amount of time, and some things I didn't know. And I don't know whether to feel good or feel bad right now. I'm not sure. I feel bad in knowing that the settlement is not the end of it, because I think most people felt like once the settlement's agreed upon, that's it. It's a done deal. And I think we felt that way. And now we're like, wait a minute, he's right, because nothing's changed. And just because you settle it don't mean that you can go break the law again or violate the rule again. And apparently that's what's happening. I mean, that's what's going to happen, it looks like. So yeah, that's a little worrisome there. And it's like I was saying, you would think that these schools, the NCAA, as he called them, the schools, would take note of the fact that, and I never did quite get my question out. I wanted to ask him, why will the schools not say, yeah, they're employees, let's just get this over with, he said some of them had, but I don't understand why they wouldn't if they know that they're opening themselves up for another settlement. It's just going to be a year after year, and I don't understand.
And what's interesting about it is there are faculty members across the country, researchers. It's very simple to do. I mean, it's laborious, but it's very simple to do. You take a sample of your employees, they're called employees, staff members, and you analyze how many hours do they work, what do they do, blah, 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 blah. And then you take your revenue-based athletes and you do the same thing and you compare the two. And there's research that's been published that's been out there at least 15 years. Some of it I know because I know the colleagues at Michigan State and the law school that have come to the conclusion that functionally, major college athletes, in terms of their performance, the functions, the amount of time, what's expected of them, the outcome in terms of the relevance for the institution, their employees. Yeah. But the schools don't want to do that. The NCAA has fought against it because with that comes, we're not going to get as much of the money as we were before. And so it's really administrative self-interest, but they're cutting off their nose to spite their face. And then the last point I'll make is, and I think it relates directly to your point, and that is that when you go the route of a lawsuit, and that's supposed to settle a situation, well, it's easy for one party or more parties to say, I don't like that settlement. I don't think it's fair. And he used the example of Tennessee. Tennessee's already done that. So who's to say that there won't be a rogue school or a rogue conference, whatever? And Tony put it well. Let's just hope the lawsuits die down.
Yeah.
We'll see.
Yeah. Yeah. And, again, looking at it, from a fan perspective, you get that settlement done. You start obeying the rules. You make them employees, which they are. I mean, that's pretty obvious to everybody, I think. And then, they have collective bargaining power, as employees. But yet, you also, what I think we need to look at is there'll be, contracts in place. You're my employee, you'll get paid this amount of money, but you got to work this amount of time. And I think that would, the transfer portal would wouldn't go away, but it would certainly settle down and not be so crazy because you'd have people locked in. So there's good and bad for both sides, I think, in this. But when it's all said and done, the good for us would be, we've got our players, we've got the same amount of money that Michigan has. We've got our players here for 4 years, et cetera, et cetera. We know their names. We can watch. We can be fans again. So, it's going to be, again, we'll have to get him back on as this thing rolls on.
Oh, yeah. Tony is there's nobody in the country I know that is looking, who understands history the way he does, and then crunches the numbers. I mean, just go on his X. The other point I'll make, and then we'll move on to next week's cast, is that one of the issues why they don't want employees is that, well, take Michigan, for example. The legislature of Michigan passed a law that says that athletes on the campuses of public universities in Michigan, which includes Michigan State, Michigan Central, Michigan Eastern, Western, a whole bunch, can't unionize. Yeah. So that's the other thing they're concerned about.
Oh, yeah.
That employees unionize. Then you've got to deal with the negotiations of contract. So there are a lot of reasons why, but what we want as fans is we want good athletics, and we want some certainty in this so that we're not always up in the air. And I think what Tony's saying is just, you got to just buckle your belt and just get through the ride. And the ride's not going to be over soon.
That's right. And to that point about Michigan, they can put themselves in a really difficult spot because, if they do get collective bargaining and these players unionize, which I think they will, there's going to be plenty of them that will. Then if you don't go along, they can't unionize. Well, too bad. This is what we're doing, and you're either in or you're out. You don't want to get left out,
Yeah.
so you got to get in.
That's right.
So that could backfire on. So it's going to be interesting. Going to be crazy.
And if you're a coach, you can't spend any time in organizing anything in terms of change. You got to focus on your team and deal with the rules as they exist today. You just can't spend time on that. And the same thing if you're an athletic director. You got to be able to get the goods delivered given where the system is today, and then be prepared to shift if it's different tomorrow,
That's right.
And I keep on telling people, we're very lucky to have Ron Baker at West Virginia.
I think so too.
He's one of the best. And so as a consequence, people say, in Ren we trust. And I think that's a good phrase.
Yep, I do too. And I think he has a good handle on, finances and that sort of thing. And he understands what's going on and he keeps abreast of how it's all working out. Heard him talk about it many times and said a lot of the same things we heard tonight. And I think we're in good hands there. So, it is encouraging when you hear Tony talk about Big 12 and the ACC and that sort of thing. I know we're running way long here. We need to move on, but it's encouraging to hear that from a Mountaineer perspective. We just hope from a fan perspective that all this gets settled and gets calmed down. But again, if you're counting on the likes of those people he mentioned, Ted Cruz and Tommy Tuberville, we're in trouble. And hopefully some more intellectual minds will get a hold of it and help us out a little bit. But anyway, that's all we can do is hope. You want to go ahead and talk about next week, and we'll get that intro out of the way?
Yeah, we're going to have a Mountaineer that many people know from the days he played, and still he's does great work. And Kevin Koken, who was center of the Mountaineers and a real leader. And as you and I have said 1.5 million times, here's another example of a Mountaineer who was a terrific football player who's gone on in life and been just as terrific in his life. He's worked for was it FedEx? I think I was going to say UPS. Excuse me. It's FedEx. He's worked for FedEx, I think, for 40 years now, and is up in the management structure. And that's one of the reasons we would have had him earlier, but he's been so busy with his work at FedEx that he couldn't come on until the end of May. We're glad to have him, and he's one of a string of people that we're bringing on every week, and that's the joy that you and I have of bringing these guys back. And it's just let them rip, let them talk about their lives back then and what they're doing.
That's right. And his story will be interesting. He was a part of some really good football teams, and he was a heck of a good football player. I enjoyed watching him play. So that'll be another fun one. Can't wait. Now I don't know, and put you on the spot here. I don't know if you have the Voice College football promo that we run at the end of the shows tonight. So we'll go ahead and do that, and we'll just go ahead now and sign off and let you do the Voice College football promo. For Frank, I'm Greg. I appreciate again everybody tuning in tonight. We appreciate Tony. What a wealth of information that was, and a lot of fun listening to him. Great sense of humor too, by the way. I enjoyed that. So that was a lot of fun. So we appreciate everybody for tuning in. We look forward to talking to you again next Wednesday night here on the Mountaineer Locker Room. Then and now brought to you by the New River Network and the Voice College Football. Good night, everybody.
Hi, everyone. Frank Fear here from Mountaineer Locker Room Then and Now, and we're pleased to be part of the Voice of College Football National Network. Mark Rogers and staff have done a great job with the network, and it's constantly adapting and expanding to bring content to you. Many of you are already following us on X and Facebook and Instagram, and if you're not, here are the URLs, the links to go to and take advantage of all the great content that's there for you. Even if you do that, you may not know some of the new doings at the Voice of College Football Network. One is a new podcast options that already thousands of people are taking advantage of. You can get it on Apple, Spotify, and other podcast networks, and we encourage you to do that. Perhaps the biggest drum roll is the new Voice of College Football website, with plenty of content, everything that you want to enjoy and can enjoy about college football. And remember, one thing that makes the Voice of College Football Network different is that we're 24/7, 12 months a year. It never ends. It's college football in the winter, the spring, the summer, and of course, during the fall. We also want to announce, and Mark Rogers again and staff have done a great job with this, a relationship with Amazon.com. And here's Mark to tell you more about it.
You can make a difference here at the Voice of College Football. Use the Amazon link. Financially contribute to the Voice of College Football without spending a penny. Same shopping experience. It's easy. Go to any video on any channel. Go to the description section and grab the link right next to the capital letters that say Amazon. Use that link, and Amazon will instantaneously convert to your account, settings, history, everything intact, just like whatever link you use right now. No difference. Pay no attention to the product that you see right there. Just go search what you want. Don't forget the Amazon link. Thank you for your support. Sincerely, the Voice of College Football.
Well, that's it for now. Let me thank you for your loyalty. Voice of College Football Network. This is Frank Fear for Mountaineer Locker Room Then and Now. Hope to see you on our channel and other channels, VOCF. Take care, everybody.